Everybody, welcome to Keeping Security in Step with your application demand curve. Nick Matthews, Solution Architect for AWS. Thank you for joining today. So let's go ahead and get started then. So like I said, I'm Nick Matthews, Solution Architect for AWS. I work with our network and security partners. We're also joined today by Rob Ayub, who's a research director at IDC, as well as Dave Morrissey, who's a director for cloud service providers at Fortinet. So, one of the core sort of topics that we need to understand about AWS is that security is really important. It's job zero for us. It's the most important thing we do. And that's because the numbers that we show up here, and these may look familiar because I'm sure many of you joined security webinars of different types. And the general principle is that security is becoming more and more important. As more and more data becomes digital, and the value of that data goes up, the sort of risk reward of losing that data or stealing that data goes up. And security and sort of hacking is actually now sort of a whole other business in itself. You can go and you can buy a supported hacking kit, from some of the dark web parts of the world. So it's changed the sort of security mindset for a lot of the enterprises and customers that I work with. One of the important parts about AWS is that, and what I'm seeing with customers is they're actually raising their security bar when they come to AWS. Not only is it nice to sort of sometimes start from a cleaner slate than some of the things we've inherited from our on-premises environments, but on AWS we actually provide a number of tools and processes and APIs that allow you to be more secure on AWS. In fact, last year at reInvent, the CIO of Capital One came on stage, and they're a large bank, and they do a lot of credit card processing and PCI and all those sorts of things, and they said they can actually operate more securely on AWS than they can on premises. So I've spent the last year really trying to help other people understand exactly how you can do that. And some of the things are different in terms of a lot of the things stay the same, right? Enforcing the physical data center facilities and good security hygiene practice. Those are things that AWS does. But on top of that, there's some things that are different. So for instance, we know exactly what's in your AWS account. There's not really a server sitting on someone's desk. So if you want to run a patch management software, it's not like you're just going to miss a server because you weren't aware it was there. There's also strong defaults. So we believe very strongly in encryption and security. So a large portion of our services that we offer to customers offer encryption by default, as well as we make sure that our services that we release are secure. So for instance, in places like IoT, where it's sometimes tempting to release things that maybe move faster but don't have the security built in, our IoT service requires X509 certificates, and it uses public key infrastructure, those kinds of things. In addition to that, a lot of security comes down to just complexity. Complexity is often the byproduct of power, but it also becomes a security issue because where there's complexity, there's operational error, and there's a lack of visibility sometimes. So by simplifying things, that also makes things more secure on AWS. As well, if you talk to our internal security teams or our security experts at AWS, they'll tell you that the less you have people and humans touching things in your environment, the more secure you'll be. Not only do they have access to make mistakes, but humans are, humans, and they will make mistakes. So it's really, really important to sort of get them out of the environment if you can. So one of the other things we talk about with customers, in addition to the sort of different operational practices, is the shared security model. So the shared security model here, this basically is the delineation of where AWS has a responsibility of doing some of the things I talked about in terms of the physical data center security. So making sure people don't sneak in data centers and or those kinds of things. So the physical portion of our security, as well as the some more of the basic security layers, like securing the networking, securing the hypervisor and the compute, making sure the storage is secure, making sure that we've got the right infrastructure availability. So we're responsible of the cloud, and then the customer is responsible for the things they put in the cloud. And so this is a sort of a nuanced conversation because it can matter depending upon the service you use. So for instance, if you use Lambda, which is effectively code as a service, we take on some more of the security responsibilities, as opposed to if you're running EC2 instances where you are running your own file system, then you have some file system sort of security you want to worry about. Sort of topical to what we're talking about is this network traffic protection area. So basically, the configurations that you make in the cloud and the data that you put in the cloud is sort of your responsibility to secure. So, like I said, you can be more secure on AWS, but just because you're on AWS doesn't make you more secure. So this is sort of where that delineation happens, and I think is really important to understand where someone like Fortinet comes in, because they help you with this network traffic protection as well as the visibility in AWS. So, when we start talking about automation, what does that actually look like? So, when we're monitoring, it's a number of things. Not only is it what is in your account, but it's also all the metrics. So we've got CloudWatch metrics, which give you either 1 minute or 5 minute increments of your compute, network, disk, etc. There's also CloudTrail. So CloudTrail is a huge advantage in AWS because every single API call that comes into AWS is logged and monitored. We recommend for you to turn on CloudTrail globally and to make sure that no one can disable it unless they have multi-factor authentication. That way, every single change that ever happens in your AWS account is monitored and it never gets deleted. So that gives you a source of truth of what happened, and it's very good for forensics as well as just understanding your account. We've also got a service called Amazon Inspector, which is a configuration vulnerability assessment. So at a point in time, you can check to see if your packages are secure, if your configuration is secure, or whatnot, if your instance is inside the operating system, actually. So another part of security is it doesn't mean a lot unless you're up and available. So AWS has a very good track record of availability, especially for cloud. So today we've got 43 availability zones in 16 different regions. To give you an idea, we just had to update that number today because we just released an availability zone. As well, if you're paying attention to some of the AWS news, we released that we're going to be building a region in Hong Kong, and there's 3 other regions that we've announced that are launching this year. So, one of the important considerations for security is that where you put your data, it will not leave. So if you put your data, for instance, in our Frankfurt region in Germany, it's not going to leave Germany unless you tell us to make it leave Germany. Same thing for if you put it in Ohio or Virginia, New York, sorry, not New York, but San Francisco, et cetera. As well, since we run such a large network, that makes DDoS sort of a different sort of conversation. Because we've got such a large network and we've got so many different ways to protect you from DDoS, things like Route 53 and even our elastic load balancing allow you to either scale out to handle the demand or outright block it, because we've now got the Shield service, which is a managed service to help you with DDoS. And in that vein, like I said, security and availability are sometimes the same thing, because if someone can bring you down due to availability, that's a security concept. So auto-scaling is very powerful in terms of making sure that you meet the peaks of demand, even if that's a malicious peak. And so part of what we're going to be talking about today is going to be, if the firewall is your perimeter, how do you make sure that the firewall auto-scales with the demand of your application as well as even potentially malicious attacks? So another part of this is that, like I said, some people are making AWS more secure than it is on-premises, but it's still very important to connect it back on-premises. So we've got connections with, for instance, Active Directory in Microsoft, so you can put domain controllers in AWS so you can have local authentication. We've also got services like AWS Direct Connect that will allow you to connect, your MPLS or your dedicated sort of fiber circuits into AWS for sort of lower latency, higher performance VPN connections or layer 3 connections. As well as we allow you to choose your own encryption keys for things like our key management service and our HSM. So that all sort of comes to the point of, how do you really believe AWS is secure? A large portion of that is the certifications and assurance programs that we have. So whether you want to build an application on AWS that can conform to PCI, level 1, or if you want to use AWS for HIPAA workloads where you need a business associate agreement, or even with FedRAMP, we've got the GovCloud for a lot of our FedRAMP workloads. So these are all sort of the sort of bare normal security compliance things that most of my customers, like ISO 27001, is one of those. So a lot of security is actually sort of very similar in AWS in this vein, except for some of it's managed by AWS. So I think in that vein, it's a good lead into what Rob's going to talk about. So, Rob, glad you're here.
Great, thank you, Nick. Definitely happy to be here today. And as Nick mentioned, I'm going to set the stage a little bit and talk a little bit today about the importance of consistent and scalable security in the cloud. Nick mentioned several aspects about security, providing security in the cloud on Amazon, but we get the question a lot. I get questions from customers all the time about, well, yeah, I mean, I know the basic security, but I'm moving to the cloud, have some concerns. What do I really need to ensure that I can manage security once I get there? And those are, I just want to, again, cover, sort of set the stage and show you what some of our customers are saying when we talk to them about moving to the cloud and the need for security in the cloud. So a few things I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the move to the cloud. I just want to set the stage around, where are we today? Where did we start? Sort of on-premise, and what are the implications of this move to platforms like AWS? I then want to talk a little bit about security once you get there, because security in the cloud is different. It is not just a wholesale move. You don't just take everything you have, put it in the cloud, and call it a day. And in fact, coming off of that is this importance of elastic security in the cloud, which I'm going to talk about. And finally, I'm going to give a little bit of essential guidance based on conversations, again, with our customers about things you should be considering, looking at, and talking through within your organization as you consider moving to a platform like AWS and moving and how you have to build your security around that. So first, the move to the cloud. How did we get to here? So in the beginning, we had these mostly mainframes, right? They were we had large machines, centrally accessed, sort of very much a one machine, many client environment. The machines were physically protected, and that was our security mindset. Protect the machine, keep people away from the machine, or manage that access to the actual machine. That was security. There was no real such thing as remote connectivity, very limited number of users, one single system. That's all we had to worry about. Sometimes I think we all maybe wish we had a little bit more of that these days, especially given the complexity of our systems today. But moving forward from that, we became client server, and I think this is the model that many of us are, sometimes are still find ourselves thinking that we're in. We had clients, we had servers, and when we thought about security, it was security around each of those specifically. So we thought about security of our clients, and we thought in terms of antivirus, VPN, host intrusion prevention, and USB security, things like that. When we thought about server security, well, that was the more traditional stack: firewall, secure web gateway, intrusion detection prevention, secure email gateway. But all this was still on-premise. We could still touch these security solutions, and we knew where they are, we knew what those systems were, and in a lot of ways, it was still much more simplistic from a management perspective, because again, these were centralized, and at the end of the day, we owned that security. Well, fast forward to today, and today we're on what IDC calls the third platform. And this really shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on this phone call, but it is a different approach to thinking about how our systems work together. When we talk about the third platform, we've moved from client server to not just cloud. That's obviously part of the equation, but we've moved to a platforms, cloud, big data analytics, mobility, social. All those pieces are now embraced in platforms that all have to operate with each other. On top of that, we also have other technologies that are finding themselves being integrated, and these platforms have to be open to developers, Sometimes the data is open to other industry clouds. Nick mentioned several of the certifications related to very vertical specific organizations. All those pieces have to work together in today's world. It's no longer about my client server environment and what I need for my company. It now is my ability to interoperate with my the financial sector, with my industry, with my customers and end users, and to do so securely. And that is the world we're living in. That's the world that I'm sure many of you are struggling with in your own organizations. And it is this drive that is towards this third platform that has people asking so many questions about, what do I do to stay secure as I move to these very much more open platforms than we've ever seen before. So what does the adoption trend of cloud actually look like? We know that it's increasing rapidly, but it's always great to have some real survey data behind in order to really see what the true adoption rates are. And the data I'm showing here is from IDC's CloudView survey. It's an annual survey we've been doing that evaluates a variety of different components of cloud adoption and movement to the cloud. And as you can see, even from 2015 to 2016, we saw a 129% increase in organizations embracing the cloud. Think about that for a minute. That's a huge number, and that's simply 1 year that we had organizations saying things like, I'm not interested in the cloud, I'm just evaluating, I'm not doing anything there, I'm just looking at it, doing some deployment and some embracing the cloud to, in this case, 59.3% of organizations saying they've embraced the cloud, and another 20% saying they are deploying workloads and services in the cloud. What that means for all of us is that cloud services, it's a reality. We can no longer say that as security, mostly security professionals, that, well, the cloud is only a small part of the business. It's not for everybody. We're just gonna wait until we have to. The time is now. Organizations are embracing the cloud. It's becoming more and more a competitive advantage, and numbers like this, just help to illustrate that drive. Another part of switching to the cloud, though, and this is particularly interesting to security professionals, is that security is still a very significant, in fact, the top concern that organizations have when we ask them, what's holding you back? So this is from the same survey. Which of the following best describes your organization's main concerns about cloud and are important inhibitors for your organization considering public or private cloud? Security concerns overwhelmingly are at the top. But I also want to point out that if you look at the top 4 bullets, security concerns, regulatory compliance, IT governance, and reliability downtime, those are all security-related functions, and those all rank at the very top of the list of inhibitors. And this just, again, it ties back to what Nick was saying in the beginning. The importance of security when we talk about cloud services is critically important, and end users like yourselves that are on this webinar and your organizations, I'm sure are looking for ways to ensure that what you're moving to the cloud has the ability to be secured. In fact, in a lot of cases, even more secure than it is on premise. So we at IDC, as we're talking to organizations, looking at this data, we're continually coming back to this this sort of split between organizations are definitely moving towards cloud and cloud services, and security concerns are still the top inhibitor and top of mind when we ask what's holding people back. So what does security look like once you get there? A number of years ago, if you had asked me this question, I would have been one of those that said, well, we're just going to move what we have on premise to the cloud. We're going to take virtualized versions of the security appliances that we have, and we're just going to move them, and then we'll develop better processes, of course, because there's still going to be some unique things in the cloud. I, and many others were not quite correct on this assumption. Security in cloud is actually fundamentally different, and there's several things that you have to consider once you get to the cloud. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit now, because there's really some fascinating examples out there about how different security is once you're talking about security in the cloud. So first off, security in the cloud is about scale, and scale always changes your perspective. Now, this is a funny little graphic just to help illustrate the point, but the reality is that once you get into the cloud and you're automating not just single numbers of servers, but tens, hundreds, thousands of servers, everything changes, and you can't just think about manually doing things anymore. And in fact, again, keeping with the line of the conversation around scale and perspective, we don't really necessarily see new threats in the cloud yet. What we've seen are new vectors. What we've seen is an expansion of existing vectors. This data here is from a survey we ran last summer. And the question was, what are the top 3 cyber attacks your customer networks are currently experiencing? Overwhelmingly, as you can see from the results, phishing, ransomware, spyware were key. Those were the key attacks that folks are experiencing. Those attacks aren't necessarily new, but when we look at the third platform, we look at cloud services, when we look at mobile, social, and all the pieces, the number of vectors that organizations now have to protect has been overwhelming. And as we've seen with WannaCry, some of the other DDoS attacks we saw last fall, the availability of new vectors has really overwhelmed security practitioners and a lot of organizations and made it much easier for attackers to try different vectors. So again, I want to stick with that theme about perspective. The scale offered to us by cloud services, the mobile platforms, in order to protect against that really changes what we as practitioners have to work with. And in fact, some people would say that there's just too many vectors to protect against, period, today. This graphic just illustrates some of the different cloud services that end users are interacting with on a daily basis. Even if you're hosting a lot of data on Amazon Web Services, there's also good chances that you're reaching out in some way or another, and that your users are leveraging data stored in other services like Dropbox or Box, Salesforce, even these conferencing platforms like GoToMeeting, which we're using today. There are so many vectors, and the data itself is flowing in so many different directions. Simply thinking in terms of inbound and outbound port and destination IPs is just not enough. Security has to take on a much more holistic approach. It has to, again, scale. It has to grow with the number of vectors. And in a lot of ways, that's been some of the shortcomings of security as we've moved into these new environments, is that a lot of solutions themselves have not grown to address the challenges associated with the number of vectors that we are trying to protect against as an industry today. As we move to the third platform, this slide is just meant to really sum up the challenges that the security industry has seen. I've talked about the vectors, that's only part of it. Talked about the growing number of environments. But there's been a number of challenges that have had a significant effect on security. And it's really changed the reality of cybersecurity as we look at it today in 2017. Growing number of environments, the death of the perimeter. Sophistication of cyber miscreants growing rapidly. Now there is NSA attack code in the hands of hackers today. You think about that for a minute, that's a pretty scary thought for an average organization. Proliferation of security tool sets. Nick mentioned the industry of dark web now, and that there's tool sets now that come fully supported with help desk support. And then finally, the scarcity of qualified information security professionals, which is the #1 inhibitor that enterprises face today. On every call I get onto with a customer, they talk about their concerns about their ability to hire qualified people that can handle the job. So when you roll all this together, you think about the expanding number of platforms, the number of vectors, the lack of workforce. The only way that we're going to be able to address all these challenges as an industry is through scale and is through automation. And that brings us to our next point, which is the need for elastic security in the cloud. So we're talking about things like automation and elasticity and scale, and those are not typically words that have been in the security department's vocabulary in the past. Security is not known for being flexible. Typically, they're not known for their ability to sorry, this slides. They're not known for being flexible. They're not known for necessarily embracing change quickly. And a few years ago, there was so many discussions and challenges about bring your own device and what that meant, and security pros on one side saying no and organizations saying yes. So how do we manage that, right? So we're dealing with security not typically known for being flexible or elastic, but the reality is that in today's world, that attitude by a lot of professionals is changing. And it's also changing because of organizations. The organizations themselves are changing, the needs are changing. And I really, there's a great example in Netflix. And Netflix to me represents in many ways the core change in the mentality of security from simply pushing back on folks, saying no, to embracing this change that is needed as organizations move to the cloud. Now, this is a public example. And there's been numerous articles written about what Netflix does around security in the cloud. They've been very public with a lot of their tool sets. In fact, many of their tool sets are open sourced, and they have just been a great example of providing an extremely secure environment that enables the business that runs on the cloud and is able to handle the huge number of servers and instances that they deal with daily. So just a snapshot here of the Netflix ecosystem, right? Hundreds of microservices, thousands of daily production changes, 10,000s of instances, hundreds of thousands of customer interactions per minute, millions of customers, billions of metrics, and tens of billions of hours of streamed content. And this is for them to protect all that. Their security has to be elastic, and any organization that's going to operate at that scale is going to have to move to embracing that notion that their security must be elastic and automated. And there's a number of reasons for this. You cannot manually provision security when you're talking about at the scale of millions of servers. You can't have somebody just pushing a manual policy. It simply won't work. There's far too much possibility for error, and it would take you so long to do manual changes, but there'd be time for the next change anyway. Second, workloads and servers need to have consistent security every time. Again, it's related to the first. Not only is it difficult to manually provision security at that scale, but policies have to be applied at that scale, and servers need to have consistent security no matter where they're at. Nick mentioned in the beginning, Amazon has 43 availability zones. The security has to be able to be applied consistently across every one of those. And so, again, it's pretty much impossible to do that automatically. And then finally, security must be tailored to the specific cloud environment. Again, we talked a bit earlier that early on there was an expectation that security would just move to the cloud sort of wholesale, but there's a lot of things that are unique to the cloud. That with resources being scattered potentially all over the globe, or just in different containers within a specific organization's zones. And security must be able to handle this sort of new architecture that isn't as reliant on IP addresses as previous architectures were. So managing security in these new environments, whether you're a Netflix or any sort of new sort of cloud-based service, requires a shift in thinking around security processes. One of the other challenges that we've seen is customer preferences about how they want to see their security delivered. And this is really important because while it's easy to talk about just pushing everything to the cloud, the reality is for most organizations, we live in a hybrid world. And so again, this data here on the screen is from the same survey we ran last summer. And one of the things we asked is, what are your customer preferences? This was a channel survey for on-premises or from the cloud security solutions. What we received back was that 21% of folks said they prefer security from the cloud first, do everything in the cloud. 37% were still holdouts. They still preferred on-prem. They still really wanted to touch and feel their security solutions. But the largest segment, and growing in our discussion with customers, is this hybrid approach. 42% in this survey said they prefer adopting a hybrid security approach. Well, what that means when we're talking about cloud security is that there still has to be a tie back. And I think Nick even mentioned that in the beginning. It's great to talk about cloud first. It's great to talk about being born in the cloud, but most organizations just don't operate that way. They need to be able to tie back to their physical on-premises solutions. And security that's designed for the cloud needs to be able to manage both situations. And in fact, we get that question a lot for organizations. There's a lot of concern that, hey, I've already invested a lot of money in on-premises security. I want to take advantage of some of the things that are being offered in the cloud. Will my vendors support security both in the cloud and on-premise? And that's an important thing for organizations to consider is what do their security vendors provide? Because the reality is we're moving very quickly to hybrid being the norm. So finally, I want to leave you today with a little bit of guidance based on our conversation with customers and things that we're advising our own customers on how they should consider security as they move into the cloud. First, we believe that enterprises should evaluate a security provider's ability to be both flexible based on the environment and elastic in order to meet the demands of modern cloud environments. We talked about security, about elasticity and automation. Those are important, and your security provider needs to be able to meet you, the customer, wherever you're at. It's a challenge with a lot of new security providers today. There's many providers that are cloud first, and there's many new providers that are doing great things, but that are still on-premises focused. And so, evaluate your security providers carefully. Second, performance is still critical in deploying cloud security products. Simply porting an existing product to a virtual machine will not allow for gaining efficiencies in the cloud. This is another key challenge that customers bring up, is that they find that many vendors may offer a virtualized solution, but they see actually reduced performance when they've put it into their environment. And that's an important consideration as you move things to the cloud is will the performance be the same, be consistent with what you're already experiencing in your on-premise deployment? And that's a critically important point. You certainly don't want to move everything to the cloud to find that your performance tanks just because somewhere along the line you know, a virtual machine isn't running at the same level as you know, maybe a server-based or hardware-based version. And then finally, inherent automation is key to cloud security products. You know, products need to be able to, they should have automation built in. And, you know, we've seen some products that provide support, you know, things like support for scripting, and that's great, but you really want products that have, that are designed to provide automation and automatic policy distribution, and you know, really go beyond just things like ability for scripting or things like that. You want products that can, you know, are built from the ground for automation in cloud environments. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dave Morrissey at Fortinet. Thank you very much for listening today, and I wish you well as you consider the very important decisions you have to make as you secure data and processes they move to the cloud.
Great. Hey, thanks, Rob. That was a really good perspective on overall cloud trends as well as the critical aspects of cybersecurity. And I can certainly attest that I do my part to add to the tens of billions of Netflix hours that are streamed through AWS. So once again, I'm Dave Morrissey, and I run the global AWS program here at Fortinet. And before discussing how we address security elasticity in the cloud, I'd like to provide a quick introduction to Fortinet itself. So Fortinet is a US-based company that's been providing advanced network security solutions for over 15 years. From a corporate perspective, with revenue over $1 billion, $1.4 billion in cash, and zero debt, Fortinet has an extremely strong financial position. From a market perspective, Fortinet is the #1 security vendor with over 3.1 million products shipped to over 310,000 customers. In fact, we actually have 2 times more security products shipped than our closest competitor. And from a customer perspective, Fortinet works with enterprise, small to medium business, government, education, and healthcare. Its customers include global Fortune companies with 8 of the 10 in EMEA, 9 of the top 10 in APAC, and all 10 of the top global telecom carriers. Overall, 50 of the 60 world's largest companies have chosen Fortinet to protect their networks. Okay, introductions aside, let's move into the presentation on dynamic security. So Rob hit on 3 key areas that are important for network security vendors like Fortinet to focus on. One is environment flexibility in both location and type. 2 is elasticity flexibility in customizing scale criteria by workload. And 3 is deployment flexibility and automation. So the next few slides will take a look at how Fortinet addresses each of these in a little more detail. So with such a diverse global customer base moving to AWS, it's critical that Fortinet has considerable environmental flexibility. We address this need in 3 areas. First, supporting auto-scaling deployments in all 16 AWS global regions ensures that all regional and multinational customers can benefit from a consistent scaling policy. Second, offering CloudFormation templates built specifically for new VPC deployments enables long-time or first-time customers to leverage this design. And third, offering CloudFormation templates built specifically for existing AWS VPC networks facilitates augmentation without the need for a forklift effort. So as no 2 customer workloads are identical, security must be flexible in allowing the use of customer-defined criteria. And we took this into consideration while developing these templates. So first, depending on your network demands, you can select from a few different triggers to scale in and out. These include CPU and memory utilization and concurrent sessions. Second, the auto-scaling architecture augments any existing segmentation or access control lists that you've established with AWS security groups, so there's no overlap or conflict with native AWS policies. And lastly, once the scaling is set, you can fine-tune your FortiGate firewall with a number of advanced security capabilities, including intrusion protection, app control, and antivirus, just to name a few. So there are many different ways to architect your scaling environment in AWS. Our focus has been helping customers simplify and automate deployment through a set of CloudFormation templates. Fortinet has released 4 versions of autoscaling templates. 2 versions leverage the AWS Marketplace on-demand instances for the primary, backup, and autoscaling groups in new or existing VPC environments. The other 2 versions also leverage the AWS Marketplace on-demand instances, but only for the autoscaling group. The primary and backup are built using your existing BYOL perpetual licenses. So this is great for customers that own the VM already or plan to keep the VM running 24/7, thus really allowing the flex to occur in the on-demand instances while the primary and backup remain constant. These varying models really enable our customers to right-size instances to meet specific network demand. So from a logical perspective, you'll see on the diagram, the autoscaling templates integrate with a number of AWS services, including CloudWatch for scaling alarm triggers, EC2 for the creation of the worker node running the script, dual availability zones for HA resiliency, and AWS Identity and Access Management for role creation during setup. We also have a step-by-step guide to assist in the setup of each of the 4 scaling options. And the process really only takes around 20 minutes from initial launch to full-scale operation. So in summary, Fortinet has created a set of CloudFormation templates that facilitate flexibility in your new or existing environment, in how you set up the scaling criteria, and in automating deployment. By creating templates that enable the use of BYOL licenses in conjunction with on-demand instances, our customers get the best of both worlds, with a fixed asset that's always on, linked to a dynamic asset that only scales when needed for a true pay-as-you-go model. So we look forward to working with you on creating dynamic security architectures in AWS, and I'd really like to thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Nick for any attendee questions.
Sorry about that. I was just on mute. Cool. Thanks, Dave. That's pretty helpful. So everybody, we got questions going on in the right-hand side of the panel. There's a little questions thing there. If you put it there, and we'll get to some of these. All right. So for those that join late, we're going to couple these. If the presentation is available for download, you'll get an email in the next couple of days with the recording and the slide deck. I believe it'll be on SlideShare. A couple technical questions. It looks like probably for you, Dave. Does the auto-scaling firewall work with the application load balancer?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I mean, more technical details on that is essentially that the routing and the NAT and all the sort of network functions of both the ELB and the ALB are basically equivalent. So it might even help you in some regards if you end up doing path-based routing. But from a network perspective, it's going to look the same. Let's see here. So there's another question, the details on, so if you have an ELB sandwich and you've got this sort of auto-scaling group of firewalls, how are the firewalls sort of maintaining state between each other? How is the configuration synced? How does that work?
John, are you going to take that one?
Sure, no, that's a good question. So if this isn't, traditional HA, which I think is a good thing to note for people. Because of the benefit that we're using virtual compute, that we have the ability then in the FortiGate security appliance to actually sync between multiple appliances. So we'll take session state, we can sync it to multiple appliances, or we can use it in a hot standby mode where the hot standby is there for configuration, and in the event of a failure or some type of convergence, that becomes the active device in the new setup. And the ELB is automatically updated, so traffic is redirected, and therefore we have a new path with devices that are there.
Cool. So then we had a different AWS question on GDPR. So that is the General Data Protection Regulation that is becoming active in the EU in a little less than a year. The good news is AWS will be ready for that. So all of our services comply with the GDPR in Europe. So that is good news for customers. Let's see here. There was another question about what about WAF? Can you auto-scale your WAF solution as well?
So I'll take that one. Currently, the WAF is not part of the auto-scaling CloudFormation templates. However, that is the fast follower, which we plan to launch this quarter.
Okay, cool. And there was a question about what is the worker node and how exactly do you keep that highly available as well?
Yeah, I typed in actually a pretty complete response to that. But a common question that comes up is in the deployment, the default template that we offer is the worker node. So it's a tiny instance for EC2. Is that deployed in HA? And by default, we don't. It can be cloned and made available elsewhere, but it has the same survivability, right? One of the the key benefits of using AWS. So since that worker node is not in the path of traffic, if there is some sort of convergence event, it respawning itself or showing up somewhere else, for lack of a better term, really shouldn't even be noticed. So there is the option to do it, but for most deployments, in fact, almost all that I've seen, we actually don't see that taking place.
Sure. There was a question about sort of if you had a slide that would show all the Fortinet capabilities between WAF, SWG, some other things. I'm not sure if you have a slide on that, but maybe you want to talk about some of the overall features that you can use the Fortinet for.
Yeah, Dave, do you have one single slide? I think you had one that was a good visual, but probably a too large of a portfolio to just walk through and ramble through for everybody. I don't know if you have a preference there, if we want to hit a few highlights, or I'll leave that to Dave.
Maybe talk a couple of sort of key customer use cases you guys see on AWS. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, and that's great. Well, Dave, why don't you take it, and if you want me to elaborate, I will.
Yeah, I'd say primarily the top three would be intrusion prevention, app control, and VPN between VPCs are probably the major use cases. And that expands, across many different types of customers, government to commercial to education. John, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
I think that's good. We've got a few other use cases. Obviously the web application firewall that does come into play. Somebody just typed in a question about VPN. That becomes a real common use case. So, and we're actually continuing to develop new products. So I think that's important. FortiSIM is a new platform that is available. So continue to evolve and continue to push more and more into AWS services.
Yeah, I guess I'd add one thing to that as well. With the hybrid network, we often see customers deploy either a VM on-premise data center or a hardware appliance of ours, and then VPN back to AWS into one of our instances in AWS.
Yeah, that's probably the most common use case we see today. From a start.
Yeah, because there was one question here that said, will our VPN still terminate to AWS, or would it terminate on the FortiGate VM? And so this is a sort of design decision I go with customers all the time. Because on AWS we have the virtual private gateway, or sometimes we call it the VGW. It's basically a managed VPN offering. Customers sometimes want a little bit more VPN sort of capabilities on top of that for maybe, say, client-to-site VPN. Or if you actually do want some of the more advanced features like some of the firewall features or intrusion detection, it's actually easier to come in over VPN from on-premises. That way all the traffic just lands on your firewall. You don't have to figure out any sort of like routing or NAT trick to get the firewall traffic in line. So that's pretty common. But you can also do Fortinet to our VPN if you have a Fortinet on-premises. So I see a little bit of both, and it's sort of a mix.
I would agree. I see the same. We do see more of the direct termination, but yeah, like you said, usually just for ease of access and simplicity. So.
And then it looks like there's another question around if you have a FortiGate device on premises, are there suggested documentation on setting a VPN to a VPC? Would that be affected by auto scaling? So I can answer that one. So actually when you go into AWS and you create a VPN connection on our virtual private gateway, you have an option to download the configuration for your device. So the FortiGate is actually listed there. So it'll tell you exactly the configuration you can basically paste into routers. And then this is a question for you guys. So if they enabled FortiAnalyzer and the SIEM on premises, would they see all that activity on the auto-scaling thing?
Yeah, so the traffic that's going through the AWS-based FortiGates, we can send that to a FortiAnalyzer anywhere or a SIEM anywhere. So some people prefer to send that through a VPN tunnel or some sort of dedicated direct connect. But either way, short answer, yes.
And then for the FortiGate VM, what's the train pay-as-you-go and bring your own licensing in terms of cost?
Good question. I'll take that one. So if you were to go to the AWS Marketplace, you click on Fortinet FortiGate, you'll see a BYOL and an on-demand version. In the on-demand version, you have the option to select either annual or hourly, and you'll see the publicly available rates for either one of those options there. You simply purchase and deploy from the panel. If you were to go with BYOL, you would procure through a traditional Fortinet partner. And that pricing, I would say it's very close to what you're looking at in AWS from an annual perspective. Obviously, there's no metered, but you would need to get in touch with your local Fortinet sales team, and you've got my contact information there. I'd be happy to put you in touch with them for that specific pricing.
And then there's another question here: does AWS doesn't offer a firewall service? Customers have to deploy their own firewall software in EC2. So, basically, security in terms of like blocking ports and those kinds of things on AWS happens in security groups. So, security groups allow you to whitelist up to 250 rules per network interface based on destination IP, source IP, port protocol, et cetera. So, we call it a virtual firewall, but we compare it to some of the more dedicated on-premises firewalls that doesn't have the advanced features like application identification or intrusion detection prevention or anything else. It's really just sort of layer 3 based and layer 4 stateful. So let's see here. So there's another question about does the security fabric integrate between AWS virtual machine and my on-site?
And that's a good question. In the short answer, yes. So our goal is a single security posture, regardless of location, regardless of deployment type. And as Dave alluded, and I think a lot of people, I think Rob mentioned that as well. Hybrid IT has really brought people to whether they've been born in the cloud or are moving to the cloud. Our goal is to make sure that they have a consistent posture everywhere they go. So visibility through endpoint, visibility through logging and analytics is available from regardless of the deployment actual location.
Okay. And then next question was, does Fortinet offer deep packet inspection as a service?
Yeah, and we don't classify deep packet inspection as a service individual in itself. What we do through both IPS signatures, app control, and antivirus, anti-malware, all of that sort of lumped under that umbrella of deep packet inspection. So by forcing traffic through a Fortinet FortiGate appliance and enabling those services, you are enabling deep packet inspection.
Okay, cool. And then let's see here. If you guys have any more questions, we're getting towards the end of them, so bring them in if you have questions. So one question is basically around client-to-site VPN, and that users often don't turn the VPN on, so it's hard to secure those remote users, and security teams need an easier way to enforce that. Do you guys have any sort of opinions or solutions to that sort of problem?
Let me read through that one again. So organize it. Users don't often turn on the VPN. So basically, they try to just use direct access or public access. That really comes down to, in most cases, a security compliance check within the organization is what we've seen. We have client software, so FortiClient, that can enforce that, and therefore make sure that people do either have the VPN running before they do an actual login, or that they don't have access. So we have that granular control of what they have access to within the client itself. So manipulating that access.
Okay. And here's one I've seen customers also ask about, which is how do you consolidate logging when you've got physical firewalls on premises and then virtual firewalls in AWS? Is that FortiManager?
Yeah, that's a great question. And FortiManager does some basic log functions. Typically, FortiAnalyzer, if people are looking for deep logging intelligence for Fortinet products specifically, and then FortiSIM if they're looking across products. So if they've got other vendors from a route or route switch or infrastructure, FortiSIM provides that more global level. FortiAnalyzer, regardless of where it's located, it can be located in AWS, which we definitely encourage and recommend, or people can utilize what they've already got, an appliance base or VM base.
And so there's another question here, which I'm not sure if I fully understand. It says, do most enterprises remove VM shared guest interaction so they can't talk, or is there security that can be leveraged? I'm not exactly sure what VM shared guest interaction is. I'm not sure if that's a feature you guys may have.
I'm rereading that again. So I'm thinking VM to VM. Okay, so not really relevant in the AWS realm. So that's the beauty. Let me make a pitch for AWS, as I do so often. You don't have to think about that. You deploy an instance, and that instance is in and of itself. This is part of the beauty. Somebody mentioned a question earlier about nefarious people or cyber criminals utilizing these services that we've made available. Look, the things that legitimate enterprises use can be leveraged by others, yes. But the beauty of this being now we've got AWS, who does a tremendous amount of work to secure who's on the network and what they're doing, and then we work as well to do the same.
Okay. And is the GUI for AWS the same as we're used to? Same FortiManager, all that kind of stuff?
Yep. Same, look the same, feel the same. Most people don't even know unless they see the little, little icon up in the top left that's got a different machine type. So, and I think the next part of that was, did they say they have local FortiManager? So yes, local or remote. Again, very, very flexible in how that's deployed.
Okay. Very cool. So I think it's time to wrap here. I think we're at time. I want to thank our guests, Rob and the folks from Fortinet that joined, and everyone that took time to be on this. I think there's a couple action items here. I don't know if Dave, if you want to wrap up the call to action here.
Yeah, I would just say, please hop up to fortinet.com/AWS, and you'll find all of our technical documentation at the bottom of the page for installing, working with the different auto-scaling templates. You'll also see a number of the assets that were available today, the white paper, the ebook. There's an interactive ebook you can step through that actually walks you through a nice GUI look on how auto-scaling looks. And then you can see the links here on this page for actually configuring your FortiGate firewall. We've got some very specific documentation available at these links as well. So I'd encourage you to please, check these out, and contact myself at my direct email, or the AWS sales@fortinet.com, with any specific questions, or if you'd like to get linked to a local team. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.